I never imagined that the twinkling glow of Christmas lights or the distant melodies of carolers would one day fill me with dread. As a child, I embodied the very essence of the holiday spirit. My eyes wide with wonder, my heart overflowing with joy at the mere thought of Santa Claus descending our chimney with a sack full of dreams. Back then, Christmas was pure magic, a season where the impossible felt just within reach. But time has a cruel way of unraveling childhood illusions. Like most, I grew up trading my fantasies for facts, my wonder for logic. The world became a place ruled by reason, leaving little room for the whims of imagination. And yet, every December, nostalgia crept in, soft and bittersweet, reminding me of a time when I believed in something greater than myself. This year, however, that nostalgia turned sour. Unwanted memories began surfacing, clawing their way out of the corners of my mind. They weren't the warm, glittering recollections of stockings and snowfalls. No, these memories felt darker, sharper, like fragments of a dream I had tried to forget. And with them came a question, one that had lingered at the edges of my childhood curiosity, but had always gone unanswered. Why did Santa only come when we were asleep? At first it seemed a trivial thought, something silly, the kind of thing children wonder before they're swept back into the magic of it all. But this time, the question wouldn't let me go. It gnawed at me, whispering in the stillness of the night, demanding answers I wasn't prepared to give. So I started digging. It was innocent at first. Old photo albums, scraps of tinsel tucked away in dusty boxes, the faint smell of pine sap clinging to forgotten ornaments. But the deeper I went, the more cracks I found in the memories I had once held dear. And then I found it. I wish I hadn't. The truth I uncovered was something no child should ever have to understand. It shattered every warm, twinkling moment I had ever associated with Christmas, leaving only the cold weight of dread in its place. I used to believe Santa was the hero of the holiday, the bearer of joy and magic. But now I know what he really is. And I wish I could forget. I wish I could close my eyes and not see what I saw, not hear what I heard, not know what I know. But once the veil is lifted, there's no going back. Some truths don't set you free, they trap you. And he's always watching. The winter of my 10th year blanketed our small town in the heaviest snowfall it had seen in decades. Flurries fell from the sky like powdered sugar, covering rooftops and transforming our neighborhood into a life-size snow globe. The scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air, and every house glowed with multicolored lights that danced against the icy backdrop. I was an imaginative child, always dreaming up grand adventures and unraveling mysteries. Christmas was my favorite time of year, not just for the presents, but for the enchantment that seemed to seep into every corner of the world. Stories of Santa Claus fascinated me, a jovial old man delivering gifts to children all over the globe in a single night. It was the ultimate adventure. That year, I became obsessed with the idea of catching a glimpse of Santa. The thought consumed me, each day intensifying my desire to witness the magic firsthand. I wanted to see the moment when fantasy crossed into reality. I spent hours crafting a plan, sketching detailed diagrams of our living room and noting the best hiding spots. Behind the couch seemed ideal, close enough to see the fireplace, but concealed by the towering evergreen adorned with ornaments and tinsel. My younger sister Lily watched me with a mix of awe and concern. At 7, her big blue eyes reflected every twinkling light, mirroring her innocent wonder. "What are you doing?" she asked one evening, peering over my shoulder at the map I'd drawn. "I'm going to see Santa," I declared confidently, a grin spreading across my face. Her eyes widened. "You can't. He doesn't like being watched." I laughed softly, ruffling her golden curls. That's just a story parents tell to make kids go to bed. Besides, I won't bother 'em. I just want to see 'em." She bit her lip, glancing around as if someone might overhear. "Mom says he only comes when everyone's asleep. Bad things happen if you stay awake." "Nothing bad is gonna happen," I assured her, waving off her concerns. "It's just for one night. I want to see the magic." Lily's gaze dropped to the floor. "I have a bad feeling," she whispered. "Please, don't do it." I paused, noticing the genuine worry etched on her face. For a moment, I considered abandoning my plan. But the allure of the unknown was too strong, the temptation impossible to resist. "I'll be careful," I promised, giving her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry." As Christmas Eve approached, I fine-tuned my plan. I prepared a small stash of snacks, a couple of cookies and a thermos of hot chocolate to keep me awake through the night. I even borrowed Dad's old pocket watch to keep track of time. The anticipation was electrifying. Every fiber of my being buzzed with excitement at the thought of finally uncovering the mystery of Santa Claus. On the morning of December 24th, the snow draped the town in a pristine layer of white. The day passed in a blur of last-minute preparations, helping Mom bake pies, setting the table for Christmas dinner, and joining in the family tradition of decorating gingerbread houses. Yet, all the while, my mind was fixated on the night ahead. At dinner, Lily kept casting worried glances in my direction. I tried to ease her fears with a playful wink, but she remained unconvinced. The rest of the family was blissfully unaware of my intentions, caught up in the warmth of the holiday. That night, after the usual routine of stories and goodnight kisses, I waited patiently until the house settled into silence. The soft snores of my parents drifted down the hall, and the only light came from the dying embers in the fireplace. Clutching my supplies, I tiptoed down the stairs and slid behind the couch, nestling into my chosen spot. The Christmas tree loomed overhead, its ornaments glinting in the faint light. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "Here we go," I whispered to myself, eyes fixed on the fireplace. The stage was set. All I had to do was wait. The house was enveloped in a hushed stillness, the kind that exists only in the deepest hours of the night. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway echoed like a metronome, each swing of the pendulum marking the slow passage of time. Outside, snowflakes continued their silent descent, piling onto the already thick layer that blanketed the ground. I huddled behind the couch, the soft fabric pressing against my back. The warmth from the fireplace had dwindled, leaving a slight chill in the air. I sipped cautiously from my thermos, the hot chocolate now lukewarm but still sweet on my tongue. As midnight approached, a subtle change settled over the house. The air grew colder, and an unnatural stillness enveloped the room. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, a primal instinct warning me that something was amiss. The flames in the fireplace flickered erratically, casting elongated shadows that danced across the walls. The logs emitted sharp cracks, the sound distorted, like bones snapping under immense pressure. A faint whispering filled the air, too soft to decipher, but persistent enough to send a shiver down my spine. I strained to listen, my senses on high alert. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, an unintelligible chorus that ebbed and flowed like a dark tide. The Christmas lights on the tree flickered, their cheerful colors now casting eerie glows that twisted the ornaments into unsettling shapes. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the roof. My heart leapt into my throat. This was it. Santa was here. But instead of the excitement I'd anticipated, a creeping dread began to coil within me. A heavy thud resonated from the chimney, followed by the sound of something scraping against the brick. The fireplace roared to life, flames bursting upward before extinguishing completely, plunging the room into darkness. Holding my breath, I watched as a figure began to emerge from the hearth. But this was not the jolly, red-suited man I'd imagined. The silhouette stretched impossibly tall, unfolding like a shadow peeling itself from the darkness. As the figure stepped into the faint light filtering through the window, I stifled a gasp. This was Santa, but not as any story had ever described him. His limbs were unnaturally long and thin, bending at odd angles as he moved. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched taut over protruding bones. Hollow eyes sunk deep into their sockets, voids that seemed to absorb any light. His mouth was perhaps the most horrifying, a wide grin that extended beyond natural limits, filled with sharp, uneven teeth that clicked softly as he moved. In his hand, he clutched a large sack that writhed and bulged, as if something inside was desperate to escape. Paralyzed by fear, I watched as he surveyed the room, his head swiveling with sharp, jerking motions. The whispering grew louder, emanating from the sack and filling the air with that unsettling, unintelligible chorus. He began to move about the room with a fluidity that contradicted his jagged appearance, placing boxes under the tree. Each present emitted a faint, eerie glow, before dimming into ordinary wrapped gifts. His movements were mechanical, devoid of any warmth or joy. As I stared, I noticed the sack had begun to open at the top, shadows spilling forth like smoke and dispersing throughout the room. The shadows twisted and morphed, taking on fleeting shapes that dissolved before fully forming. A chilling realization settled over me. These were not gifts of joy, but something far more sinister. The shadowy entities floated through the air, ethereal tendrils reaching out like fingers, seeking something unseen. They weaved between the ornaments on the tree, seeped into the walls, and drifted upward toward the bedrooms where my family slept. The whispering intensified, a haunting melody that set my teeth on edge. I watched in horror as one of the shadows drifted toward me, passing so close that an icy chill sliced through my body. It didn't seem to notice me, instead joining the others as they spread throughout the house. Their movements were hypnotic yet terrifying, like a swarm of dark spirits unleashed upon our home. Pieces of a horrifying puzzle began to fit together in my mind. These entities were the source of the so-called Christmas magic, but their purpose was far from benevolent. They were feeding, drawing energy from the dreams and subconscious fears of my sleeping family. The tales of Santa, bringing joy, were a facade masking a much darker truth. A wave of nausea rolled over me as I understood why Santa only came when we were asleep. This wasn't about preserving the magic of Christmas. It was about harvesting something from us, something intangible yet vital. I shifted slightly, a reflexive movement born of mounting terror. The floorboard beneath me creaked ever so softly. In the deafening silence of the room, it sounded like a thunderclap. Santa's head snapped in my direction, movements unnaturally abrupt. He sniffed the air, a grotesque parody of an animal catching a scent. The hollow voids where his eyes should have been locked onto my hiding spot. A low growl emanated from deep within his chest, resonating like the rumble of distant thunder. Panic surged through me. I pressed myself tighter against the couch, willing myself to become invisible. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain he could hear it. He took a step forward, long limbs carrying him across the room in a single stride. His mouth twisted into a wider grin, revealing even more of those jagged teeth. The sack at his side thrashed violently, the shadows pouring out in greater numbers. "Who's awake?" he crooned, his voice a distorted echo that sent a jolt of fear straight to my core. I clamped a hand over my mouth, stifling a whimper. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to cooperate. I was trapped, a mouse cornered by a predatory cat. He moved closer, the distance between us shrinking rapidly. The shadows began to circle around him, their whispering now a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm my senses. Desperate, I remember the snacks I'd brought. My fingers closed around one of the cookies. A pathetic weapon, but all I had. In a blind act of desperation, I tossed it toward the far side of the room. The cookie hit the wall with a soft thud. Santa's head jerked toward the sound, and for a brief moment, his attention was diverted. Seizing the opportunity, I scrambled out from behind the couch and bolted toward the hallway. Behind me, a guttural roar signaled that he'd caught on to my escape. The world around me blurred as I sprinted down the hallway, my socks slipping on the polished hardwood floor. Behind me, the sound of furniture crashing and ornaments shattering indicated that Santa was in swift pursuit. But the noises were all wrong. Too fast, too erratic, as if he were moving in ways that defied the natural order. A quick glance over my shoulder sent a new wave of terror coursing through me. Santa was crawling along the walls and ceiling, his limbs bending and stretching in grotesque fashion. His hollow eyes were fixed on me, and that impossibly wide grin seemed to split his face in two. I lunged for my bedroom door, throwing myself inside and slamming it shut with a resounding bang. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the lock, the simple mechanism feeling infinitely more complicated under duress. Silence hung heavy in the air. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear any sign of movement. Then, a soft tapping, a single, deliberate knock that sent chills racing down my spine. "Little one?" His voice slithered through the crack of the door, dripping with sinister sweetness. "You shouldn't be awake." I backed away, my eyes darting around the room for any means of escape. The window was closed, frost tracing intricate patterns on the glass. Even if I managed to open it, the drop from the second floor was too dangerous. "Go away," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He chuckled softly. "It's too late for that. You've seen what you shouldn't have." Shadows began to pool under the door, seeping into the room like a black mist. They swirled around my feet, cold and suffocating. I scrambled onto my bed to escape their touch. "Leave me alone," I shouted, panic giving way to sense of reason. The doorknob rattled, but the lock held firm. Santa didn't attempt to break it down. Instead, he began to hum a haunting melody, a twisted version of a familiar Christmas tune that made my skin crawl. A burning sensation flared on my left hand. Looking down, I saw a strange mark etching itself into my skin, a swirling pattern that glowed faintly with an otherworldly light. It pulsed in time with my racing heartbeat. What is this?" I gasped, rubbing at the mark to no avail. "It's my gift to you," he whispered, "a reminder of our encounter." Tears blurred my vision. I don't want it." The humming ceased. "You cannot escape me now. Awake or asleep, I will find you." Footsteps echoed down the hallway, heavy, familiar footsteps. My father's voice called out, groggy and concerned. "What's going on? Are you okay?" Relief washed over me. "Dad, help!" I heard the creak of the floorboards as he approached, followed by the click of the hallway light turning on. The shadows recoiled, slithering back under the door. Santa's presence seemed to fade, the oppressive weight lifting ever so slightly. The doorknob to my room twisted, and my father stepped inside, his eyes squinting against the sudden light. "What's wrong? Why are you up?" I threw myself into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "He's here! Santa's here!" He held me tightly, confusion and concern etched on his face. "What are you talking about? Did you have a nightmare?" I wanted to protest, to make him understand the danger, but exhaustion crashed over me like a tidal wave. My limbs felt heavy, and my eyelids drooped, despite my efforts to stay awake. "Come on," he said gently, guiding me back to bed. "It's late. Let's get you tucked in." As he pulled the covers over me, I caught a glimpse of the doorway. For a split second, Hollow eyes stared back at me from the darkness. But when I blinked, they were gone. Sleep claimed me before I could fight it, pulling me into a void where shadowy figures whispered my name. Morning arrived with sunlight spilling through the curtains, casting warm patterns on the floor. I awoke with a start, my heart pounding as the memories of the night flooded back. For a moment, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, unsure if any of it had been real. The mark on my hand caught my attention, a swirling pattern etched into my skin, faint but undeniable. I traced it with my finger, the skin tender to the touch. It hadn't been a nightmare. I dressed hurriedly and rushed downstairs. The scent of pancakes and maple syrup filled the air, and the sound of my family chatting in the kitchen created a facade of normalcy. "Morning, sleepyhead," Mom called out as I entered the room. "Merry Christmas!" "Merry Christmas," I replied softly, my eyes scanning the room for any signs of the previous night's horrors. Lily sat at the table, her face smeared with syrup. She gave me a hesitant smile. "Are you okay?" I nodded, forcing a smile in return. "Yeah, I just had a weird dream." Dad looked up from his newspaper, concern flickering in his eyes. "You were having quite the night. Everything all right?" I hesitated. I thought I saw Santa." He exchanged a glance with Mom before giving me a reassuring smile. "Well, maybe you did. Look at all the presents under the tree." I glanced into the living room. Sure enough, an array of brightly wrapped gifts awaited us. For a moment, the allure of Christmas morning tugged at my curiosity, but the weight of the previous night's events kept my excitement at bay. Throughout the day, I tried to bring up what had happened, but each attempt was gently redirected. "Sometimes our dreams feel very real," Mom said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "But they're just dreams." Even Lily seemed to have forgotten her warnings, lost in the joy of her new toys. I felt isolated, burdened by a secret that no one else seemed to acknowledge or understand. As the years passed, the memory of that night remained vivid. Every December, as Christmas approached, I found myself growing anxious. Sleep became elusive, plagued by vivid nightmares that left me drenched in sweat. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, disappearing when I turned to look. I tried to rationalize it, attributing the experiences to lingering childhood fears, but the mark on my hand never faded, a constant reminder of the truth I wished I could forget. Determined to understand what was happening to me, I immersed myself in researching Christmas folklore and myths. I spent countless hours in libraries and online forums, sifting through legends from around the world. One evening, buried deep in the stacks of an old library, I stumbled upon a dusty tome filled with ancient tales. Among them was a legend that mirrored my own experience, a tale of a predatory entity that visited homes during the winter solstice, feeding on the dreams of those who dared to stay awake. Those who saw it were marked, forever tethered to the creature and its shadowy minions. My heart pounded as I read accounts from others who claimed to have experienced similar encounters. They described the same mark, the same nightmares, the same haunting shadows. It wasn't just folklore, it was a pattern. I found a passage that sent a chill down my spine. "Beware the watcher in shadow's cloak, who comes when children are woke. To those who peek and seek the sight, he marks them on that fateful night." As Christmas approached once more, the mark on my hand began to glow faintly, a pulsing light sinking with an ache deep in my bones. It was as if the entities were drawing closer, their pull on me strengthening with each passing day. I reached out to others who had shared their stories, but many of the posts were years old, and responses were scarce. Those who did reply offered little solace. Some had disappeared entirely, their accounts dormant. The realization settled heavily upon me. I was dealing with something ancient and malevolent, something that couldn't be escaped through conventional means. I began to prepare, researching ways to protect myself. Symbols of protection, rituals to ward off evil, anything that might give me an edge. I learned about salt lines, protective charms, and incantations said to repel dark entities. But doubt gnawed at me. If others had failed, what chance did I have? The decision to confront the entity one last time was not made lightly. I knew the risks, but felt that inaction was a greater threat. If I was ever to break free from this curse, I had to face it head on. I spent weeks setting up cameras throughout the house, though I wasn't sure if they'd capture anything. I laid out protective measures, salt lines at every doorway and windowsill, candles inscribed with ancient symbols, and charms hung in strategic locations. My parents, noticing my heightened anxiety, decided to spend Christmas with relatives, hoping the change of scenery would help me relax. I insisted on staying home, fabricating a story about needing to study for upcoming exams. Reluctantly, they agreed, leaving me alone in the house. Their absence weighed on me, but it was necessary. I couldn't risk them becoming collateral damage. On Christmas Eve, a heavy silence descended upon the house. The isolation amplified every creak and groan the old building made. As midnight approached, the atmosphere grew oppressive. The air felt thick, each breath a laborious effort. Shadows pooled in the corners, darker and more substantial than they should have been. I sat in the living room, surrounded by a circle of candles inscribed with protective symbols. The flickering flames cast long shadows that danced across the walls. Clutching a worn book of incantations, I steeled myself for what was to come. Then, the whispering began. A faint murmur that quickly escalated into a chorus of dissonant voices. The candles flickered violently before extinguishing one by one, plunging the room into darkness. A chill swept through the room as the temperature plummeted. My breath fogged in the air, and goosebumps prickled along my skin. The salt lines at the doors and windows began to sizzle, tiny sparks dancing along their lengths. He appeared before the fireplace, materializing out of the darkness. The entity, or whatever twisted being masqueraded as Santa, was even more grotesque than I remembered. His limbs contorted at impossible angles, and his hollow eyes now burned with a sinister light. The sack beside him convulsed, bulging as the entities within strained to break free. With a swift motion, he opened it, and the shadows erupted forth, swirling around the room like a maelstrom. I held up a symbol of protection, a pendant inscribed with ancient runes, and began reciting an incantation I'd memorized. My voice shook but grew steadier as I continued. The shadows recoiled slightly, their advance momentarily halted. He tilted his head, a mocking gesture. "Do you think your tricks can stop me?" I swallowed hard, meeting his gaze. "I won't let you take me." He advanced, the shadows closing in. "You were mine the moment you saw me." Desperation fueled my actions. I grabbed a handful of salt and threw it toward him. The grains sparked in the air, causing the shadows to waver but not dissipate. "Futile," he hissed. The entities converged, their forms solidifying into grotesque figures with elongated limbs and featureless faces. They reached for me, cold fingers brushing against my skin. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I lunged for the fireplace poker, swinging it through the air. It passed through the shadows without resistance, but as it sliced through the space where they existed, the protective runes I'd carved into the metal began to glow. The shadows shrieked, recoiling from the weapon. Santa watched with a twisted grin. "Come now, embrace your fate." The shadows regrouped, pressing in from all sides. I felt their cold tendrils wrapping around my wrists and ankles, sapping the strength from my limbs. "No!" I screamed, fighting against the encroaching darkness. In that moment, a realization struck me. The mark on my hand, the very symbol of my curse, might also be the key to my salvation. Summoning every ounce of willpower, I focused on the mark, envisioning it not as a brand of ownership, but as a conduit of light. A warmth spread from the mark, growing hotter with each passing second. The swirling pattern began to glow fiercely, illuminating the room with a radiant light. The shadows shrieked, their forms unraveling under the intensity. The entity recoiled, shielding his hollow eyes. "What are you doing?" he roared, his voice a blend of anger and fear. I stepped forward, the light from my hand growing brighter. "I'm taking back what you stole." He lunged at me, but the light formed a barrier, repelling him. The shadows disintegrated, dissolving into wisps of smoke. Channeling the energy, I directed the light toward him. "This ends now." A beam of pure light shot from the mark, striking the entity square in the chest. He let out a deafening scream as cracks formed along his pale skin, light seeping through. The house shook, objects rattling and falling as the very fabric of reality seemed to tremble. With one final, agonized cry, the entity exploded into a burst of light and shadow, the fragments dissipating into the air. Silence settled over the room. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a calm stillness. I sank to my knees, exhaustion overtaking me. The mark of my hand faded, leaving behind only a faint scar. Life after that night became a journey toward healing. The shadows no longer haunted my dreams, and the mark on my hand remained a simple reminder of the battle I'd fought and won. I reconnected with friends and family, allowing myself to embrace the joys I'd long denied. Lily, now a young adult, often teased me about my newfound appreciation for the holidays. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace sipping hot cocoa, she glanced at me thoughtfully. "You seem happier these days." I smiled, nodding. "I guess I have a new perspective on things." She hesitated before speaking again. "You know, I used to have the strangest dreams around Christmas, shadowy figures and eerie whispers, but they stopped a few years ago." A chill ran down my spine. "Why didn't you tell me?" She shrugged lightly. "I didn't want to worry you. Besides, they were just dreams, right?" I reached out and squeezed her hand. "If you ever have nightmares like that again, promise you'll tell me." She looked into my eyes, a hint of concern flickering in hers. "I promise." As the years passed, the memory of that fateful Christmas Eve became a distant echo. I chose to share my story, writing it down in the hopes of warning others. The legends we tell, the myths we share, they often hold grains of truth buried beneath the fiction. So, when Christmas comes around and the allure of magic fills the air, remember this: some things are meant to remain unseen. Curiosity can be a dangerous thing, opening doors that should stay closed. The scar on my hand serves as a reminder of the darkness I faced and the light I found within myself. I've come to understand that while evil may lurk in the shadows, we have the power to stand against it. And as for the entity that once haunted me, I believe it's gone for good. But every so often, I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement, a fleeting shadow. Perhaps it's just my imagination, or perhaps some remnants linger, waiting for another chance. This Christmas, embrace the joy and wonder of the season, but be cautious of the mysteries that tempt you. Some secrets are better left undiscovered. After all, legends often carry a warning, and sometimes the stories we tell are all too real.